Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Overseas Development Institute. My name is Alex Thier, and I'm the Executive Director. We are delighted to have all of you here tonight. Thanks for your patience. The popularity of this event has made it so we have tried to stuff ever more people in to the room because we're very excited about our event tonight on Building Back Better, a Resilient Caribbean. The 2017 hurricane season caused tremendous damage and disruption, and we have people with us tonight who will be able to testify directly to the effects on their country and their people. Those events, however, also did something I think quite remarkable in helping to jolt the world awake about the challenges and dangers that confront us all. And I think have left us to question not whether we can afford to build back better, but whether we can afford not to. Out of crisis like this is a moment of opportunity, a moment for us to examine the investments to be made and the potential for doing things differently to create a better future. And tonight, we have some people with us to be able to shine light on that moment of opportunity. We are very honored to be joined tonight by the Right Honorable Patricia Scotland, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. We are also joined by the Honorable Francine Barron, the Minister of Foreign and Caricom Affairs from Dominica. We will have with us on the screen Ronald Jackson, who is the Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And we are also joined by Dr. John Twigg from ODI. John, I'm looking for you up back there, who is a leading global expert on these issues. But we are also joined by an incredible audience of experts, both in the room here in London and hundreds more online. People who have spent the day here talking through some of these challenges, and many of you out there. And we invite you not only to appreciate, but to join the conversation. We will have the opportunity for audience engagement, both online and here in person. And we also ask you to join us online. The hashtag for the conversation today is Build Back Better. And if you use our handle @ODIDev, we will carry forward the conversation and even see if we can get trending in London and beyond. I am delighted now, however, to introduce the chairman of our board, James Cameron. James is a leading climate change expert and has been working in the salt mines of climate change and negotiations for decades. I won't say how many. But we are delighted to have James here, and I'm going to hand over to him now to introduce our first speaker. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Alex. Well, let me add my welcome to you all. Marvelous to see such a full house. Tribute to our speakers and to the subject matter, which is serious, important, and urgent. Alex is right. I spent many years, 30 years as of next, working on the climate change issue, and my introduction to it was working with the creation of the Small Island States, the Alliance of Small Island States. So this is a topic that embraces the Caribbean and other parts of the world who have suffered many of the same fates. And it's also true that many years ago, 1991, I recall, working with the late, great David Pearce at UCL, we constructed an insurance regime that we tried to negotiate into the Framework Convention in 1992 and failed. And I often, I'm afraid, wonder whether, had we been successful, whether we would have to have the kind of conversation that we are having today. Still, here it is. We've got a major crisis to address, but we've got some good ideas about how we might do that. And you've been having a great discussion today, I know, about some of those ideas, and we want to hear them. We want to hear them from you in this audience and anybody online who has questions or insights they'd like to share. Just to give you a quick run through of how we're going to proceed, we're going to start with the two keynote presentations from Secretary-General of Scotland and Minister Barron. This will be followed by a short Q&A session, followed by a panel discussion, and then I'll open the floor to a further Q&A session that you can all join in on, whether you're here or online. And then when we're done in here, we can move next door and we can have a networking reception which can carry on. And it may well be that one or two topics are better suited for that conversation than here. So when we get to the questions phase, please do ask questions, and you can have debates afterwards over a glass of wine. So as Alex said, please do get involved with the hashtag Build Back Better. You never know, we might trend in the social media sphere. So now, first great honour is to introduce the Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, trained as a lawyer, a barrister. The Secretary-General became the first black woman to be appointed to Queen's Counsel, a good high honour in our legal profession, and the youngest woman to be made a QC. She joined the House of Lords in 1997 and was appointed Attorney General in 2007, the first woman to hold that post since it was created in 1315. And she is the first woman and sixth Secretary General of the Commonwealth, appointed in 2016. So the floor is yours, and with great honour, we pass over to you, Patricia.
Thank you very much, James, Honourable Ministers, Excellencies, Commonwealth friends. The first thing I have to warn you is that I've been sounding like someone out of a James Bond villain movie for a whole week with my voice. So if it cracks, bear with me. I really stand before you today, both as Secretary-General of the Commonwealth and as a proud daughter of the Caribbean, born in the beautiful island of Dominica, which, as you know, was devastated by the hurricane season last year. And this means that the matters that we are discussing together today are really very close to my heart indeed. And they are also close to the heart of the whole Commonwealth, because our Commonwealth commitment to mutual support for inclusive development and building resilience to reduce vulnerability has been present throughout the whole of our period. So the title of this gathering is composed of what could be called Commonwealth signature words: building, better, resilient. And of course, the Caribbean and Commonwealth go hand in hand. It's impossible to think of one without thinking of the other, particularly within the context of small island states. And under the heading Recognition of the Needs of Small States, our Commonwealth Charter declares and says this: we are committed to assisting small and developing states in the Commonwealth, including the particular needs of small island developing states in tackling their particular economic, energy, climate change and security challenges, and in building their resilience for the future. That was 2013. In the context of sustainable development, the Commonwealth Charter commits us to removing wide disparities and unequal living standards as guided by internationally agreed development goals, and to building economic resilience and promoting social equity. It also states, and I quote again, that we are committed to an effective, equitable, rules-based multilateral trading system, the freest possible flow of multilateral trade on terms fair and equitable to all, whilst taking into account the special requirements of small states and developing countries. And we can expect to see fresh, collaborative, practical action towards collective fulfilment of these commitments when our leaders gather here in London in 6 weeks' time for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, or CHOGM, as it is more generally known. It's more than 40 years since this biennial meeting of Commonwealth presidents and prime ministers previously assembled in London. And so this will be a very significant occasion. The assembled leaders represent the governments and people of the Commonwealth family, which is made up of 52 independent and equally sovereign states set in every continent and ocean. And we may very soon be 53 countries, and more are hoping to join. I have almost a daily request for people to know a bit more about the Commonwealth and how do they join. Now, there are large and small countries, some with advanced and some with developing economies. Populations range from the very large to the very small. We have India with 1.2 billion and Tuvalu with 11,000. But each of the states are equal in importance to us. And the overarching theme for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is towards a common future. And the focus will be to build on the strengths of the Commonwealth in order to deliver a fairer, more prosperous, secure, sustainable future for all of our citizens, particularly our young people, who account for more than 60% of our combined population. So the 2.4 billion people who live in the Commonwealth amount to about 1/3 of the world's population. In some of our countries, like Uganda, the percentage of young people is even greater. Uganda has 78% under the age of 30, 59% under the age of 18. So Commonwealth programs and projects really help to boost economic growth and encourage trade and to address the threats such as climate change, debt, and inequality. And we come together as a Commonwealth not because of shared geography or economic parity or other similar or mutual interests. We are united by our joint commitment to our core principles: consensus and common action, mutual respect, inclusivity, transparency, accountability, legitimacy, and responsiveness. And our values and principles are set out in the Commonwealth Charter, and they are fundamental to the way in which the Commonwealth connects and cooperates, including through providing support to build back better for a more resilient Caribbean. And if you look at the Charter, it mirrors almost exactly the 17 clauses and of this Sustainable Development Goals. And many of our smaller and our more vulnerable member countries have recently been disrupted and in some cases absolutely devastated by the extreme weather events and other catastrophes. We now see the adverse impact of climate change affecting every single region of the Commonwealth. There have been landslides in Africa, floods in Asia, hurricanes have ruined and devastated the Caribbean, and I don't think any of us will ever think of the words Irma and Maria in the same light again. And when I visited the Caribbean 3 months ago, I saw for myself what that devastation really meant. I knew that going home to Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica after such a catastrophe was going to be difficult, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw or the story that I heard during my visits. As many of you will know, my father's Antiguan and my mother is Dominican, and I was born in Dominica. So this was literally looking at places and people that I knew. And flying into Dominica, I hardly recognized the land of my birth. Maria had devoured almost all of its vegetation. Dominica is one of the most lush and green islands you will ever have the privilege to see. And all of it was gone. Recently built roads were smashed and barely accessible. Decades of infrastructure and development had been undone. In Barbuda, it was a similar story. as we travelled along the empty roads on the evacuated island, when my guides pointed out landmarks, they referred to them in the past tense. This used to be our church. That was our police station. And these were ghostly remains of what shortly before had been a vibrant, almost electrifying community. And it was all gone. Silent. And such weather patterns are complex. And perversely, while we may see increased incidents of flooding, we're also seeing the negative impact on water security. As rainfall and other factors become more unpredictable, cross-regional sustainable land and water management practices aligned with improved approaches to water quality and consumption will become ever more critical to successfully coordinating climate resilient action. And the associated impacts of extreme weather, particularly on food security because of reduced crop production yields, and to human health through risks such as malaria, are also now of grave concern to all of us. Population growth is, of course, another serious component in the climate change challenge. But the disruptive impact of the anthropogenic climate change on the delicate balance of life on this planet poses a real existential threat to many of our communities and, in some cases, entire countries. So for all of those who've thought for years, when we talked of this threat as an existential threat, thought we were crying wolf, well, we've just been eaten, because the wolf is really here. And that is why tackling climate change is a priority for collective action by the 52 member countries of the Commonwealth. Because although the shock from recent extreme weather is fresh and immediate, this is not a new or an unexpected crisis, and we can expect it now to happen again and again and again. So it is almost 30 years since, in our Langkawi Declaration of 1989, the Commonwealth of Nations collectively expressed deep concern at the threat posed by serious deterioration in the environment, warning that any delay in taking action to halt this progressive deterioration will result in a permanent and irreversible damage. That's what we said as a family in 1989. And resilience is a strength we seek to build in the Commonwealth as a defence against the vulnerabilities resulting from geographic, economic, social, political, and human factors. And the thing that I'm so proud of in the Commonwealth is, although we said it in 1989 and people didn't believe us, we didn't stop saying it. And the fact that we've continued, and the fact that people are hearing us and seeing the damage, is a really important moment for us to grasp. And therefore, I think what was said earlier is all too true. So in the light of these recent catastrophic events and the ever-heightening vulnerability of our member states, we are currently in the process of refreshing our strategy on climate change and increasing its technical breadth. And currently there are 4 main pillars to our climate change work. So let me say a few words about each of these, if I may. The first, there is climate finance. Although the international community has pledged billions to address climate change, countries find it extremely difficult to draw from the financing mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund for projects to help people to adapt to climate change and mitigate its effects. And our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which is based in Mauritius, helps countries navigate the complexities associated with climate financing so that they can make successful applications to the international funds that address climate change. And the hub assists member states with human and institutional capacity building, enabling them to unlock funding for mitigation and adaptation so that they would not otherwise be able to reach. And Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica are among the countries who are already being supported. And second, there is climate change law. At COP23, we launched our Law and Climate Change Toolkit, providing online access across all 52 Commonwealth states to the best and most salient legal statutes and frameworks required to support climate change. And we are also working to help our member states in the Caribbean and elsewhere with strengthening legal frameworks to meet mitigation and adaptation goals and to ensure the smooth relief efforts after adverse weather and other emergencies. And our newly established Office of Civil and Criminal Justice Reform is providing legislative reform guides and drafting tools, drawing together the best from member countries so that it can be taken up to accelerate progress and implementation of good practice in other Commonwealth jurisdictions. We know only too well that the acuity of legal expertise that is needed in this field is relatively thin on the ground. So the more we can pool, collate and share, the better we will enable our member states to address these issues. The third is regenerative development. As our understanding has evolved, the regenerative model for building resilience to climate change has emerged, including specific expressions of collective commitment, such as the Commonwealth Blue Charter, which really started at the Oceans Conference in the UN last year. And we are expecting there to be significant focus on this new initiative at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. It may be one of the major things which will come out of CHOGM. Maybe, because of course, as the mere servant of the member states, I couldn't possibly comment. The ecosystems form critical building blocks which assist us in building resilience together. And coral reefs, so vulnerable to increased storms, perform essential flood protection. And the ecological protection of land and river catchments help us to ensure water security and guard against land degradation and drought. And from this recognition grows the concept of regenerative development, which encompasses our belief that climate adaptation and resilience must be bottom up, placing people and ecosystem service and function at their very core. Now, our focus is particularly on those aspects of regenerative development which help us to reduce vulnerability by tackling the dimensions of climate change that affect human security. And we set human ecology and climate resilience of communities at the core of all of our work. And the fourth, there is surveillance, monitoring, and technical capacity building. Many of the nations most at risk from climate change are least responsible for it, yet they are operating at the extremely limited data environments. And time series data is generally very poor, and so there are issues of accuracy associated with projecting change and impact. And this is one of the many technical challenges associated with capacity for building resilience to climate change in small countries and island states, because most of our small countries have public institutions with only limited technical or other resources available for the development of forecasting models and surveillance tools. If you think about countries in the Pacific with only a population of 11 or 10,000 people, that's a big ask. That's a very big ask. So feeling inadequately resourced really affects people's morale and can significantly undermine the effectiveness of professionals when it comes to advocacy and advising on important policy decisions. And to counter this, we're exploring ways of improving collection and access to climate change data and of making surveillance tools available for Commonwealth countries that would otherwise really struggle because of technical capacity constraints. And more specifically, and of particular importance in the Caribbean context, is I have undertaken to do everything in my power to challenge rules which render a high income but climate vulnerable country, which has just lost all its economic sectors and its entire GDP to a hurricane, ineligible for official development assistance and ODA. And I can't tell you how extraordinary it was when I sat and watched a woman, a very well-resourced woman, sitting in the shambles of what used to be her house, and the only thing that was recognisable was her fridge and a mattress. And telling that woman that she was an affluent, middle-income country person was a very interesting moment. So we have already seen lots of progress on this, and with donor countries now committed to reviewing of the rules, and recognition, I think, is due to the UK for its intervention in this regard. But it's been a snowball that we've been pushing up that hill for many years. I think the whole 30 years that you've been at it, and I won't say how long I've been doing the same, because of course I'm very young. So we have a Commonwealth expert on the ground in Antigua and Barbuda, and we will soon have a Commonwealth specialist advisor in place alongside Dominica on the development of strong climate change projects which will attract funding. So in conclusion, may I say how really delighted we are to be working in partnership with ODI and with each and every one of you and the organisations that you represent, either as members or as friends or as allies of the Commonwealth, because building back better for a truly resilient Caribbean is our shared ambition. But it is an urgent and resounding rallying cry, and far more than just a slogan. It must be our commitment and become a reality for the common good and for our Commonwealth. And I do not just thank you for what you've done today and what you will do this evening, but I really want to thank you for what you will do in the future. Because without our joint, collaborative, powerful action, nothing's going to happen. And for all those people who are destitute and without a home and who aren't here to thank you themselves, I want to thank you on their behalf.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I think I'm going to go straight on to Francine now to speak, because we'll have plenty of time for questions, and we want to get the audience involved as well. And so our next keynote speaker is Honourable Francine Baron, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Caricom Affairs of the Commonwealth of Dominica. So why don't you come? Honourable Baron previously served as Attorney General from 2007 to 2010 and High Commissioner to the UK from 2012 to 2014. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, James. Let me recognize a daughter of the soil of Dominica, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Scotland, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and I extend warmest greetings to you from the friendliest of countries in the Caribbean, the Commonwealth of Dominica. I want to thank the leadership of the ODI for taking the initiative in putting this event together. It is both timely and needed for us in this particularly vulnerable region of the world, and more so for us in Dominica. I think that my Prime Minister said it well when he said that we are on the front line of the war on climate change, a war that we did not start and a war that we are powerless to end. Many of you would have seen the graphic imagery of the damage and destruction that was unleashed on our tiny island by this monster megastorm, Hurricane Maria, on the 18th of September. When such events occur, it is critical that there be an immediate response of search and rescue and then in delivering relief. Capacity is always an issue in such times, and we are grateful, therefore, for the quick action of many countries, including the United Kingdom, and the international and regional agencies who quickly came to our assistance in the post-disaster relief and recovery phases. Were it not for their unconditional support, the commentary on our efforts to clean up the country and deliver urgently needed relief to our citizens would not be as positive as it has been. Mr. Chairman, no part of the island was spared. Every single sector and every single family was negatively affected by this hurricane. The post-disaster needs assessment conducted by the World Bank in conjunction with the UN, ECCB, the CDB, and the EU to assess the disaster impact concluded as follows, and I quote, Hurricane Maria resulted in total damages of US 931 million and losses of US 382 million, which amounts to 226% of gross domestic product. The identified recovery needs for reconstruction and resilience interventions, incorporating the principle of building back better where possible, amount to US $1.37 billion. Now, you would appreciate for a country where the budget is EC 1 billion, to have US $1.37 billion in damage is very significant. We believe, however, that the true amount that it will cost Dominica to recover is likely to be much more than what is stated in the report, given that losses and damages for the environment were not quantified, and that entire communities will have to be relocated because of the extreme vulnerabilities to floods and land slippages. We have made much progress since the storm, but so much more remains to be done. Road access has been restored across the island. All schools have reopened. Those which were completely destroyed are operating on a shift system with other schools. Major health services are now available, and water services have been restored to 80% of the island, and the airport and seaports are operating. Unfortunately, approximately 80% of homes still require substantial repair to or rebuilding of their roofs. Electricity has only been returned to about 10% of customers, and it is anticipated that full coverage will not be achieved before April. The economy remains severely affected, as damage to farms, hotels, and businesses will take time to recover. Our forest reserves will also require extensive rehabilitation. We are delighted at the positive response of the international community to Prime Minister Skerritt's declaration when he addressed the United Nations a few days after the storm, where he said that it was a goal and vision of his government to make Dominica the first climate-resilient nation in the world. This was no idle statement on his part. We are serious about making this vision a reality, and we have been deeply encouraged with the pledges made at the donor conference which followed. Mr. Chairman, I am here to tell this audience and those listening via social media that we are not about to take a step of faith into the dark unaware of the challenges and possible pitfalls that lie ahead. We have been wrestling with the impacts of climate change on Dominica for quite some time, and we want to ensure that we have made the right policy decisions and developed the types of programs that will significantly reduce or eliminate Dominica's vulnerabilities to its impacts. It is in this context that our low-carbon climate resilience strategy was developed. It is also in this context that we have been pursuing the development of our geothermal resources as a signal of our resolve to move away from fossil fuels, a major contributor to climate change. 2 years before Hurricane Maria, Tropical Storm Erica destroyed 90% of our GDP, with approximately 6 hours of continuous heavy rainfall. Major damage was done to our infrastructure in some parts of the island. We resolved then to approach the rebuilding program with a Build Back Better approach. This was all aimed at building a more resilient country. Barely had the ink dried on the numerous surveys, designs, and cost estimates that had to be done in order to fix the damaged and destroyed infrastructure when Maria struck. Maria has made it necessary for us to re-strategize. Our current goal to build the world's first climate resilient country leads to a redefining of the scope of the task ahead. We are now focused on the policies and interventions that are critical to ensuring climate resilience in all sectors of the economy and within communities. While the literature on building back better after a disaster is growing, we believe it is of utmost importance that we seek not only the input of the international community, but also we must engage our population in crafting the plan for a climate resilient Dominica. On February 19th, therefore, we will be convening a national rebuild and economic partnership consultation. This consultation will be themed Building a Climate Resilient Nation, Our Collective Responsibility. We think it is important to engage all stakeholders and interests within the country in developing a national plan for climate resilience. We have learned some important lessons along the way. These lessons are important for policy formulation in the short and medium term and are appropriate in a small island developing state context. I will now share some of these with you. It is absolutely necessary to have a well-functioning National Disaster Committee chaired by the highest executive authority. This body must be supported by sectoral emergency committees, who must meet regularly and have a plan that is periodically tested for its effectiveness. There should be an office responsible for disaster management which is adequately staffed with the appropriate technical personnel and well-resourced. That office should be charged with the responsibility of issuing clear and timely information before disaster, where possible during the event and after, and they should be guardians of relief supplies after a disaster. Every effort should be made to train and develop at the local or village level disaster committees to lead and coordinate activities in their community following a disaster and before the external assistance becomes available. In relation to shelters, it has been our practice to use schools, churches, resource centers, and private dwellings as shelters. However, in most cases, these structures were not designed as shelters and are just as vulnerable to suffering damage during a storm, negatively impacting the persons seeking shelter there. After the storm, it also affects the resumption of operations of these places. This is of particular concern where the occupation of schools as shelters affects the timely reopening of schools after a disaster. In the building of resilience, therefore, one must design and construct robust and well-equipped shelters with well-trained shelter managers and adequate support staff and supplies. The sheer volume of relief supplies that can flow into a small country like Dominica can overwhelm the capacity of our ports. This has been our experience post-Maria. Solutions to this may be found in expanding the seaport, training port management in logistics, and in ensuring that the port is adequately equipped for the task. The issue of coordination of relief agencies is an area that always presents a challenge. When one is in crisis mode immediately after a disaster, how do you coordinate the activities of the various relief agencies and response teams that are activated to ensure greater effectiveness? It is important to have a clear plan and someone with dedicated responsibility to manage that process and serve as the interface between government and these agencies. Fiscal policy, of course, should not be overlooked in building resilience. In our small economies, we do not have significant reserves to turn to when disaster strikes. When one's warehousing and distributive systems are destroyed, it is critical that the government has a fund that it can utilize to supply the needs of its citizens for food and water and to bring relief in other areas. After Tropical Storm Erica, the government had announced its intention to create a vulnerability risk reduction fund. Such a fund is essential. It can provide a fallback position in leveraging resources to treat with risks and vulnerabilities generated as a result of external economic factors or disasters. It is important that the necessary support is given for the creation of such a fund. Ladies and gentlemen, in normal times, small states like Dominica suffer from capacity deficits, which slows down policy formulation and program implementation. This is exacerbated after a disaster. The human and financial resources available to us at this time simply cannot do the job required to make Dominica the first climate resilient nation in the world. It is for this reason that Prime Minister Skerrit determined that if we are to carry out the interventions necessary to climate-proof Dominica and to execute it in a timely fashion, it was necessary to establish an agency fully dedicated to the recovery process. We have therefore been moving forward with the assistance of DFID and in consultation with international development partners to develop a framework document for the creation of a climate resilience execution agency for Dominica called CREED. It is intended that this agency will streamline our policy formulation and project cycle management systems and implement the climate resilient strategy. The CREED will have a clear mandate to coordinate and implement projects. It will enjoy a certain degree of autonomy to carry out its objective and will have the benefit of input from all sectors in society. It will be adequately staffed and resourced. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I have attempted in the short presentation to provide just a snapshot of some of the challenges and policy issues that Dominica has confronted and will have to address in the short, medium, and long term. This is by no means exhaustive. We know we have to tackle the contentious matter of zoning and land use in a more decisive manner. The types of industries we encourage and promote in a country that stands proud as a nature island of the Caribbean. To become the world's first climate resilient nation will require, among other things, profound reflection and decision making. We will have to deliberate on and craft an appropriate legal framework to both support and enhance the development of a climate-resilient country. We foresee a road that will be long and arduous, but we are not daunted. We are indeed encouraged by the overwhelming support we continue to receive from our friends and the international community, the ODI being no exception. It is your faith in us and our trust in you that gives us the confidence that we will in fact succeed. Thank you very much.